I kind of work quite thematically, I suppose, in terms of the way I write, and I was really interested in this period of hysteria, social hysteria, and moral panic, and eventually I managed to kind of hone in, because I kept thinking about responsibility. It's all about responsibility, and then I was like, no, it's blame. Blame is the theme here, because basically this is Thatcher's Britain, so. You know, we're talking about like a very specific period politically, and a very specific kind of oppression and atmosphere in terms of the UK. And it's at the same time when VHS is invented, and suddenly you can watch you know, these horror films in the home. I mean, none of these films were available in the cinema because they weren't good enough to go to the cinema. So suddenly there's a boom in low budget horror, and they're going direct to the home, and everybody becomes worried about these films turning us all into sort of murderers and psychopaths and things. And the press just went crazy, and there was like a frenzy, and it kind of really stirred up more and more hysteria around these movies. But what I sort of see looking back is, you know, blame. Like, it's a scapegoat. It's an easy scapegoat to say, oh, well, all these terrible things are happening in the world. It's very easy to say, you know, horror films are doing that, rather than any kind of government taking responsibility for the decisions that they're making. So I guess through Censor, I wanted to sort of create a character that kind of embodied a lot of that. So it became more and more a character piece, where the main character in Censor kind of embodies lots of these ideas, and that kind of theme of blame really runs through the film. You know, especially with her, because she blames herself for a lot of things and is blamed for things, and you know, so it's kind of like taking that, how I see the era, and then, you know, funneling that into a character almost.
But I think it takes time to get that. I mean, I think the idea of describing what your project is, and I've been through this, where you're trying to kind of work out how to describe it, whatever it is, and that will change and develop and kind of like evolve, and it won't be like, you know, it straight away. It'll be something that kind of like, you know, filters through after, you know, smashing around the subject. Can we jump to the next slide? Because we got a couple of interesting things. So you did a chat with Mark Commode and Kim Newman, who's one of your executive producers. I think Mark said that he had the certificate, the actual certificate of the Evil Dead. But you have you have a couple of interesting things that you know about, because from having done your research. A couple of things that you know about the Evil Dead specifically, which I didn't know. So maybe you could fill us in a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up as a massive Evil Dead fan. So when I did performing arts at college, and our final performance was called "Kill Her If You Can, Love a Boy," which is a line from the Evil Dead, and it was partly based on the Evil Dead. It was a really bad play where we like reenacted Evil Dead scenes in slow motion and stuff like that. So you can imagine how much I love this film. And so when we were researching Censor, one of the first places that we went was the BBFC, obviously, and they were quite friendly and open, and wanted to talk to us. So we went in and chatted to a couple of the examiners there about how they work, what they knew about the period and that kind of thing. But then also we were able to book out any files that were over a certain X years old. I don't know if it's 15 or more, but you can actually go in and book out a certain amount of files and read through the comments that they made. So we booked out like "I Spit on Your Grave," "Last House on the Left," you know, "Driller Killer," all the really nasty ones, and obviously the Evil Dead as well. And what was interesting about looking at those files was that you start, as writers anyway, me and my co-writer Anthony Fletcher, we sort of really started to see the personalities of the film censors coming through in the way they commented on the films, even though they only had their initials at the end. But there was the Evil Dead was visited, and it's always funny reading these comments, because they're very intellectual, well-educated people talking about in depth about like the tree rape scene or a decapitation, or like, you know, these kind of gory horror moments. And they talked about the male id a lot in their comments, which we found quite amusing. And then about 6 or 8 years later, I can't remember exactly how long after it was, they revisited The Evil Dead. It was resubmitted, and one of the same film censors watched it, and who had watched it during this period, and his comment was, "I can't believe we reacted like this. It's such a kind of funny, silly horror film. I can't believe we took it so seriously, but it was the atmosphere of the period, and perhaps we were being affected by the press and by everything that was going on outside." And I found that really interesting, because every time I met a film censor, you know, who worked during that period, I was always kind of trying to get a handle on how they were being affected by, you know, the outside world, in terms of like, does that make you view the film in a different way because of what's going on in the news and stuff. Yeah.
Find us at NoDirectionHome.com.